I have the honor to open the panel session. I'm Annette Magna. I'm a member of the program committee of today's event, and I'm also the managing director of the Swiss Clinical Trial Organization. The panel is about statistical, regulatory, and ethical issues related to platform trials, and is chaired by Juan Genesca. I hope I spelled it properly. And if I look at the program of today, it's also caring for a bit more gender diversity because we have quite a couple of males also in the panel. I will shortly introduce Juan. He is a professor of medicine at the University Autónoma de Barcelona, and he's chief of the liver unit there at the Department of Internal Medicine of the Hospital Universitari Vall d'Hebron at Barcelona. Furthermore, he is the coordinator of the IMI-funded EU Pearl project, and he was and is involved in clinical and translational research, mainly focusing on chronic advanced liver diseases and complications of cirrhosis, including portal hypertension. Furthermore, he is a member of different professional associations, and as mentioned, he will chair the panel and also introduce the panel member. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Annette. That was a long introduction, but thank you. I want to thank the JACS and ECRIN for this kind invitation and for this panel. I mean, Jack said at the very beginning of this morning that some of the reasons for having today's main theme being the platform trials was the COVID pandemic for one side, and also the UPEL project. So that's probably the reason why I'm here, because we coordinate this project, and why three of the persons of the panel are also members of UPEL. So let me introduce the panelists. We have a great group of people with different expertises. First, I would use an alphabetical order. Fergus Sweeney, he is from the European Medicines Agency, Head of Clinical Studies and Manufacturing Task Force. Then we have Frank Halstad. Okay, Frank is a senior researcher in the Belgium Healthcare Knowledge Center. I also see Marco, just here right now. Marco Cavalieri is also the EMA Head of Biological Health Threats and Vaccines Strategy. Welcome, Marco. Then Martin Posch, also a member of UPEL and a professor at the Medical University of Vienna, and well, a real expert in methodological aspects of platform trials, among many other things. And finally, Valentina. I'm not seeing Valentina. Valentina, hi. Very nice presentation before. Valentina is head of programs of the European Patient Forum, and she's also responsible for the patient engagement part of UPEL. So we will start with Marco. Marco, I mean, among many other things, you also chair the EMA COVID Task Force. So I understand that you have a lot of experience in platform trials design in the COVID pandemic. So the first question would be, based on your experience, what do you think is the best setting for platform trials, where they could be more useful?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, indeed, as you rightly say, we gather a lot of experience and we've seen a lot of attempts of setting up platform trials. And indeed, for COVID, what was worrisome at the beginning that we saw too many trials done in a sparse order with different sample size, different endpoints, different way of conducting them, which then ended up with rather inconclusive results. So we were really pushing for establishing a good network that could run platform trial in the context of COVID therapeutics, because of course one of the advantage would be to have several candidates at the same stage of development that can be thrown into these platform trials and taking advantage of maybe a single control arm. So of course optimizing then the inclusion of patients in such trials and generating data across different investigational therapeutics that will be extremely informative, and then you can even compare among themselves and come up with a consistent way of looking at the outcomes. So we have been pushing for this to happen, but of course we saw the complication first of all of establishing networks that will be across different member states, so not involving just one or two member states, at least from a European perspective. We saw that NIH in the US was able to come up pretty rapidly with a platform that could run trials for therapeutics for COVID-19. And we also saw WHO trying to do the same with their solidarity plans. And of course, the efforts by WHO is really complicated because, of course, they were trying to include centers all over the globe, which also increases the potential problem of many different standard of care and different healthcare systems, and then how to reconcile everybody. It's not so straightforward in the context of these type of trials. So these were a bit the difficulties, and now also Europe has been moving on with the EU response in trying to set up a platform trials, but we've seen that it takes time. So one of the concerns is still that I think we are a bit too slow in having this advancing. Despite one of the major successes that we've seen is what has happened in the UK with the recovery study, which was able to advance a number of therapeutics. Some of them we did not even believe into, like the desamethasone, but turned out to be really the only drugs that so far demonstrated efficacy in the context of COVID-19. So the importance really of testing different agents at the same time, according to large data sets, and according to well-established platform protocols. One of the issues, of course, that we've seen even in the context of the monoclonal antibodies, which with antiviral activities that you may wonder they are pretty much all the same, is that in actual fact, not all of these drugs are the same. And then how to handle different inclusion-exclusion criteria or different needs with respect to safety monitoring can be cumbersome, and is one of the complications that we have been seeing with such platform trial. And so sometimes it's not so easy really to set up a set of criteria for inclusion of patients that would indeed be rather universal and allow to include all the agents that you would like to test. But I think we are building experience on this, and I think after the pandemic we will have to go into a lesson learned and to really understand what worked well and what can be established for future emergencies, but not forgetting that, like in the area of antimicrobial resistance, already came up the importance of setting up networks that could run trials with different agents at the same time, so that to alleviate the burden of cost and time in advancing the development of new antibiotics that we badly need. So this will be my preliminary remarks.
So Marco, most of the COVID platform trials, they are using drugs already on the market. So do you see a difference between repurposing or trying new drugs with the intention to register it as a new indication?
I think I do, in the sense that, as we often discussed also with the colleagues from Recover in the UK, what they're doing is a bit of a more type of pragmatic study in which there is not an intense data collection, particularly on the safety side, which is something that probably we would be eager to accept in the context of repurposed draft, of which we have already a good characterization to start with, even if in a different patient population, in a different type of use, but at least we got already a baseline, and therefore we will be more open to accept a more pragmatic approach with less intense data collection on the safety particularly, but you also cover like virology or the other important aspects on biomarkers and inflammation. The problem would be in the context of new entities, because then we would need these studies to be really able to collect what we normally require, both in terms of safety outcome and efficacy outcome. So in other words, like the stream approach taken by the WHO, in which essentially the information collected was very minimalistic and just looking at the major outcome of hospitalization, death, and in intensive care admission, that's of course would not be sufficient to be pivotal evidence that would support the approval of a brand new drug that has never received an approval. But in the context of repurposed drug, of course, I see more margin to discuss an in-between that could make these trials more feasible, but at the same time give us sufficient amount of evidence.
Okay. Thank you, Marco. So moving now to Fergus. Hello.
Hi, good afternoon.
I guess, I mean, you have a lot of regulatory experience in your daily work. And this morning, I heard the Barbara Kerstens saying that they are working in an European community guidance to address major regulatory hurdles for complex trials. So that I thought it was a very good news, because this is really something that we really need. So from the regulatory perspective, Fergus, what would you say are the three main regulatory challenges for a platform trial?
So thanks very much, Juan. And you'd asked a number of questions in advance, and I think I'll span over them also too, because there are regulatory challenges which are scientific, but also regulatory challenges which are more practical in terms of managing the process through the clinical trial application system. So first of all, to confirm that indeed we have very active discussions going on at the moment. We'd quite an outreach with academia and industry associations towards the end of last summer, and in the autumn, collecting information on what are key hurdles, and this under the heading of complex trials, which is perhaps a bigger landscape than purely the platform trials, so also including aspects of adaptive designs and other parts of complexity. And you, in a sense, have you've got the scientific and methodological challenges, and I think Martin will address much more the methodology and design aspects, which are critical to get right, and where these trials bring very different challenges. You have the desire potentially to use external data sources, which may come from historical clinical trial data, historical perhaps comparator arms, or indeed real world evidence, and mixing and matching these with active treatment or control arm is a challenge from the methodology point of view. I think in terms of how these trials can evolve from the point of view of a regulator authorizing trials, and we have in a little bit this balance between repurposing and registration, but we understand quite a number of these trials start out as exploratory, and I'm thinking beyond COVID now, also in the oncology area and others where these are used. And it may then be that a particular arm shows greater promise, and perhaps even something that then the owner of that treatment wants to bring forward for regulatory authorization. But because it was an exploratory trial, there may or may not have been scientific advice, and even where there was, that may have been more focused on dose finding, biomarkers, rather than a solid understanding of these are all the data elements that you're going to need for registration. And it comes back a little bit to the comments Marco also made in the context of some of the COVID trials, where you're taking a pragmatic approach to move quickly and look to established products established for other purposes and their value in the particular disease area. So this can bring challenges then, because then people bring forward the results which have gaps in them, and because they are taking the exploratory part and bringing it forward. But I think the key points really I wanted to think about, and it's part of what we're looking at in this group, and we've people from EMA, from member states, European Commission, and then we've had meetings with, as I say, industry association experts and academia, and looking at what the challenges are. One of the areas is in how do we, it's the infrastructure in a sense, and I heard a part of that raised also in the last presentation. I think there are a number of things, and one really, these kind of trials, and depending on the design, can challenge our concept of what is a clinical trial. And I think we start to move, and there's a CTFG reflection paper also on complex trials, where in order to have a trial authorized and processed through the system, you have a certain number of constraints. But if the scientific ambition is to build in a number of treatment arms, possibly each joining at a different point in time and completing at a different point in time, the more of that you add, the more it becomes difficult to manage as a single clinical trial in the regulatory concept. So you may have then a scientific trial, which is a single trial, but is composed of a number of individual trial applications, and it makes us really think outside of the box, so that these can be managed well and not gridlock in the system of substantial modifications and other aspects. So it brings challenges from that point of view. I think it brings challenges, and we do need to think out of the box to enable good trials to take place. It brings challenges in the sense of who then is the sponsor, and I think with some of the COVID protocols, and not just within Europe, but in other areas where they're dealing across multiple countries, is who is the sponsor? Is there a core sponsor who can lead the discussion with multiple country regulators with a single protocol and bring the application forward at the same time with all of those countries, and obviously having a regulatory process that can interact with them? And I think the new clinical trial regulation will build much more that focus through a single application, but then you need one entity who's the sponsor, and whether that's a group of public health bodies in different member states, or several companies, or even a mixture of both. They need to find a way of building a single organizational structure that can be the leader of the protocol, I think, and deal with the methodology of the authorization.
Carlos,
yeah.
One short question. The new CTR regulation will be more friendly to platform trials?
So I think it brings both advantages and challenges. I think under the existing legislation or under the new legislation, having multiple substantial modifications is challenging, and we have to process each one. And if you have multiple treatment arms belonging to, let's say, several pharma companies, each with his own product, and each one brings changes and they're coming at different times into the study, running that as a single clinical trial application, I think, will be challenging. But what the new system does bring, and I think this is really important, is whether you build that as a single clinical trial application or several trials which are grouped together in a scientific concept of an overarching trial, and which brings the data together and the analysis, you have a single application for no matter whether you've one member state or 27, it's one application for the competent authority and the ethics committee through the portal, both for the initial application and subsequent applications. Likewise for the safety reporting, so long as the different joint sponsor entities can bring all of that information together. And you have a coordinated assessment on the core information, so the protocol, the product dossier, and the safety is assessed as a core across the member states, the individual investigators, ethics committee, the informed consent sheet, and some of those things then are addressed at the member state level, but the main scientific discussion is coordinated across Europe. So I think that offers a huge advantage. The big decision will be then, how many pieces do you fit into a single clinical trial application, or do you choose to join a number of different ones to get the best advantage of the system?
Thank you.
And still manage the trial well, because I think that's important.
Thank you, Fergus. Okay, Martin, could you tell us, in a very short way, the main challenges from the methodological statistical point of view for a platform trial design, and also how conditions change from an early phase to a late phase clinical trial, please, Martin.
Yeah, sure. Maybe let me mention three challenges. I think the first issue when designing a platform trial is the issue to identify the trial objectives and to link them to the corresponding methodological tools and design elements. As the statistical design is always driven by the main objective of the trial and has to be aligned with the patient's perspective. So the questions asked are, is the purpose to generate evidence for regulators and or for HTAs? Do we want to identify all efficacious drugs with efficacy above a certain threshold? Or do we want to find at least one drug, or one drug as fast as possible? Or do we want to identify the most efficacious drug among a certain set of treatments? So these objectives will determine the definition of power in the trial, and will be important then for sample size specification, but also for the choice of adaptation rules. And this brings me sort of to the second issue, which is how to select adaptation rules to be used in such an adaptive platform trials. And there are several design elements to choose. So the number and timing of interim analysis, defining the stopping rules for futility, efficacy, and also safety, possible sample size reassessment or update of randomization ratios, which can be response adaptive, as we heard today from Remap CAP, or just changes due to the changing number of active treatments in the trial. Then when and which treatments to add to the platform, and finally also selection of subgroups may be an issue if different populations are concerned. So of course, all these adaptations also have an impact on the statistical properties of testing and estimation procedures. So also this has to be addressed when planning such a trial, to be sure to still have valid inference in the end. And as we also heard already today in the morning, the adaptations may also affect which control data are used. And this brings me sort of to the third issue, the control groups. We know that one of the main benefits of platform trials is the common control group that can be used for multiple treatment control comparisons. So compared to a setting with separate trials, where separate trials are run and each would need its own control arm, the sharing of a control group can substantially increase the statistical power. However, in the platform trial, where not all treatments enter at the same time, this also introduces some complexity, and it's a current controversial point of discussion how to include non-concurrent controls in treatment control comparisons. And the reason for the controversy is the potential for confounding with changes over time when comparisons are made to participants who were not concurrently randomized. And just this week, the FDA guidance for platform trials in COVID-19 was published, and this also addresses this issue. And I think COVID-19 is a very good example where the possible changes in time trends become quite evident as changes in the distribution of patient characteristics, changes in standard of care, background treatments, change of centers, and also disease activity. So like in COVID-19, we saw that in the beginning, mainly the elderly were affected, and as vaccination started, then the average age decreased. And if not appropriately adjusted for, such time trends can introduce bias if non-concurrent controls are used. So this is sort of one discussion point, and also one of the research topics actually in EU Pearl, to look on how one can adjust for these time trends. And maybe to the second point, you mentioned the comparison between early phase and confirmatory late phase trials. I think overall one can say that for the early phase trials, there's more flexibility in the choice of analysis method, inclusion of non-concurrent controls, also the use of Bayesian analysis that can be very useful not only for decision making in interim analysis, but also for the interpretation of final results. When it comes to confirmatory trials, a purely Bayesian analysis is still controversial, and typically type 1 error control will be required. But also in the confirmatory trial, Bayesian methods can be very useful in the planning of the trial, and also in the formulation and selection of adaptation rules in interim analysis.
Okay. Thank you, Martin. Frank, you are the HTA person, and talking about scientific evidence, do you think that the platform trials are more or less adequate to provide scientific evidence than classical clinical trials, or this is not the right question?
I think it's a very pertinent question, in fact. So HTA and regulators, they tend to differ in their opinions when common scientific advice is provided to companies starting phase 3. And the divergence is about a comparator to be used. And so the HTA people, they want to see the standard, the usual care as the comparator as much as possible, a broad patient population, and endpoints that are patient relevant. And so overall survival and quality of life related endpoints. So, but it's very positive, I feel, to have this discussion now and with the buy-in of regulators and HTA to consider these platform trials either as a separate track in addition to the classical registration trials, or looking for synergies where possible, because indeed, if you go for simple trials, the number of variables collected may not be sufficient for regulatory purposes for registration, but at least the element of comparative effectiveness is included in the platform trials, and also of treatment optimization. So yes, there is a huge potential in there, and it's very positive to have this dialogue and to consider this not only in the context of COVID or infectious diseases, but beyond this, definitely also for orphan diseases, for example, where we need to use the available patient population as efficiently as possible and to come to evidence-based conclusions as rapidly as possible. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. If I can add something to your comment, the last part of your comment is that in UPEL that we have to develop 4 IRPs. One of them is for neurofibromatosis, so that it's go right to the point that you were mentioning just right now. Valentina, so after hearing your presentation bit earlier, I know that you reserved part of your presentation for the questions now, but one thing that I was thinking when you were presenting is that clinical trials are difficult to understand for patients, but platform trials are even more difficult to understand for patients. So it could be that the complexity of a platform trial might be a reason for the patients to refuse to enter the trial because they just don't understand what the trial about. So What do you think about that? Do you think this is a real problem that we have to face?
Thank you for this question, John. I think it's not the complexity the main reason for refusal, because for patients, the driver to join trials is really to potentially have access to effective treatments. So, and that's a very important driver, especially for those patients with the highly unmet needs, where a treatment is not still available. Of course, the complexity is not an issue. In the UPERL, actually, we are working to produce guidelines and tools that can support patients in better understanding platform trials, the way they work. And we are working with a group of patient advisors to build these tools and recommendations. We are also in connection with the patient communities like the World Ocean Organization, who they had started conversations around platform trials a few years ago. And so also through them, we want to investigate what are potentially the issues from a patient perspective. What I know so far, that eventually a reason for refusal might be not being enrolled on the trial arm that they would prefer and would consider more promising. So this might be eventually a challenge.
Yeah, but I mean, one of the things that you explained before that's very straightforward is the informed consent. So the informed consent, it's easier to explain that you're going to receive this drug or you're going to receive a placebo, but to explain that you may go, you go into REMAP-CAP, for example, you don't know really what are you going to get on many other different options. So for me, I understand that complexity, if it's not very well explained, it will be difficult for patients, and some patients will say, well, I don't understand this, I don't want to participate.
It might depend from case to case. So maybe what we have to explain is the complexity at a level that they can understand it. And they may, in some cases, accept to take a risk without fully understanding the whole context, but this doesn't mean that we shouldn't provide the overall information that is available. So in UPERL, we are working also, we are going to work on informed consent and see how it can be adapted to platform trials. We are also taking inspiration from existing platform trials like Stampede, where this exercise is already being done. So we are not going to reinvent the wheel, but we are there to really stress test these tools and see how they work. And whether they are fully effective from a patient perspective. One last point I'd like to add, that maybe, as also Cecile mentioned, trials may be burdensome for patients. And so maybe the big challenge might be really the logistical organization of the trial, the proximity of the trial center. It's not necessarily the complexity, but really how they fit this experience in their daily life.
Okay, and just to finalize this first round of questions, could you, Valentina, summarize for everybody and from the patient perspective, what are for you the risks and benefits for entering a platform trial for a patient?
Yeah, at the moment, probably because I'm biased, I see more benefits rather than risks. But of course, the more I learn about platform trials, the more I might have a more balanced view. At the moment, the key benefit is for sure the shorter time needed for the trials, which will increase efficiency, but also faster assessment of promising treatments. And this is very important. As I said earlier, for patients with high unmet needs, this is very important because it gives them hope to have access to promising treatments. Another very important point is that there is a chance for a larger patient populations to be enrolled. And we understand that the platform trials come with the different arms options. And this means that also different patient subgroups might be involved. And so this also brings a level of inclusion and diversity that was mentioned earlier in a question. Another important point is also to have that they have a higher chance to be allocated to a promising treatment rather than placebo. So this is also very important from a patient perspective. It still represents an issue in conventional trials from an ethical point of view, but we see platform trials may help to somehow overcome this aspect. We are also working with UPERL to make sure that the trial search can be done easily and faster, which means for patients an opportunity to find the right match. We know that there are tools that some of our matchmaking tools really helping patients to find the right trial for them. And we are looking at how this can also be embedded in new tools produced by UPERL. So this is in a nutshell. As you said, of course, the complexity of trials and especially the fact that they are very long term, this might represent a challenge because long-term trials required, continuation, keeping on board the key profiles, and from a patient perspective, it may be disruptive. Is maybe the people they are used to be in touch with at some point withdraw or they leave for other career opportunities. So there might be some probably not logistical, emotional side effects due to the length of the trials.
Okay, thank you. I see no questions from the audience yet, and on the chat.
Frank would like to say something.
Yes. Hello. If I may add, I think it is also important for patients to have, if there is multiple options, to have a direct comparison of the different treatment options. So, and in fact, it's not only having a rapid access to innovation, but evidence-based innovation, which is key for patients. So probably having such platform trials and definitely having them starting in the pre-market phase, I think is key for patients. Over.
Indeed, yes. Of course, a generation of evidence may direct them in towards those treatments that can be more effective, and where the evidence is available, of course.
So one of the characteristics of a platform trial is that it might run for a long time or forever, and then it might have a common control arm. So one question that the patient may ask is, if I am the control arm, I'll be in the control arm forever? So could anybody answer this question, please? I'm a patient and I am asking this. Martin, you want to ask? You want to answer?
Yeah, I think in this respect, a platform trial may not differ from regular trials. So the follow-up time for a specific patient, this will, of course, depend on the specific trial objective, but the time a certain patient spends in the trial will be defined similarly as also in other trials. I think this has to be distinguished sort of from the recruitment time for the control, which may be actually going continuously for a very long time or perpetually, but that needs to be distinguished from the time the patients are actually in the trial, which will typically be limited.
Okay, that's reassuring. So I will stay on the trial as a control for a known period of time. I don't have to worry to be placebo all my life. So that's very good. And Marco, I think that you also responsible for the vaccine program in for COVID. So my question is, could be the platform trial technology applied to the vaccine trials, or this is not the right question? Because there are so many vaccines on going on trials and being developed at the same time. Could that be done?
Yeah, of course it can be done, and actually, again, WHO has been trying to do that. They have not started yet, but I think they are planning since a while to conduct really a platform trial in which they could include multiple vaccines at the same time using a single placebo arm as a comparator. So in a way, the same type of reasoning would be applicable to vaccines as therapeutics. What we have seen is that first of all, different vaccines get ready for confirmatory phase 3 trials at different point in times, and that's also may create some complexity. And then secondly, the other important point is that a lot of these platform trials are indeed being set up by non-governmental organization, public health authorities, academic groups, and industry, particularly with the pivotal trials for their vaccines, but also therapeutic, would like to have a bit of control of what is going on and be sure about the entire endeavor, the quality of the study, how this is done. And that's also the reason why we have not seen a huge interest, after all, particularly with vaccines, in joining platform trials so far. Maybe this has been due to a number of different reasons in the context of COVID-19, but that's what we have seen. Now, as you know, there are some efforts in Europe with Vaccelerate to set up also a network that can run clinical trials for vaccines. And of course, when it comes to vaccines, there are two different types of studies. So one are the more immunogenicity kind of studies, which in a way are a bit easier. And the other one are the real clinical efficacy one. And there, potentially a good clinical trial network could be helpful in that sense, because you need to recruit cases as soon as possible and to go where cases are. So, so try to follow the epidemiology. So the broader you are with your network, the better it is. But of course, at least for COVID-19, we are moving into a situation in which it will be really difficult to do placebo-controlled trials, and with most of the people being vaccinated, even comparative study looking at non-inferiority as an example in terms of clinical efficacy would be quite prohibitive, because you won't have enough cases in a sufficient amount of time, and if you see very few cases, it might be very difficult then how to interpret the data. So there are some intrinsic issues with the studies that we may have to envision in the future, but definitely it's good to be prepared. It's good to have a network that can run platform trial for vaccines in the face of future emergencies, but also for vaccines for pathogens that for which we don't have yet vaccines available. But I have to admit that the difficulties have been really coming up here, and we have seen really the difficulties in setting up in a timely manner a network that could be trusted and could be used also by different companies. And I guess one of the other problems that companies have is the direct comparison, which of course is important, like from an HTA perspective more than from a regulatory one. But of course, they are not very keen in having their vaccine compared directly to the other one in such a crude way. And that's also contributed to the reason why they prefer to go their own way and to set up their own trial. So definitely something that we have to reflect on and see what can be done. But I would assume that in certain settings and with certain types of vaccine, a platform approach would make sense and would be convenient also from a public health perspective.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Frank, go ahead.
If I may add to that, indeed, we in Belgium tried to set up such a direct comparison of the different vaccines on immunogenicity, of course, not a large efficacy trial, but there the advanced purchase agreements did not really help because there was uncertainty whether such independent clinical trials were possible at all. So, and it got us to a delay of 3 months before we got started. Over.
Okay. So we have one question from the audience, and the question is about if it's still possible to have placebo-controlled trials for COVID-19 vaccines from an ethical point of view.
Well, maybe I can start, and because we are discussing this right now, and it's a very important topic. Since we have to deal with a number of second-generation vaccines, and it's important that we find a regulatory pathway that could lead to the approval of these vaccines. But it's true that if you look at the situation in the European Union over the summer, most likely, or even now, to conduct a placebo-controlled trial, including the elderly or high-risk group with comorbidities, hypertension, diabetes, is going to be challenging because, you know, this group are recommended for vaccination, and the vaccination campaign are moving on quite swiftly, or at least they could be better, but they are moving on also across the European Union. And we have to envision that after the summer, for sure, conducting a placebo-controlled trial in the majority of the adult population would not be feasible, at least in the European Union. Of course, many are arguing that you could do these studies elsewhere. There are places which unfortunately don't have access to vaccine, and there you can still run this placebo-controlled trial. But I think, at least from an EMEA perspective, we are extremely careful in not demanding trials that would be considered unethical in the European Union, according to the current recommendation. Of course, if companies propose themselves and they are able to do it, then we may accept that. But we will not be imposing such studies because we know that in the European Union cannot be done. And so this is definitely something that we are discussing also with other regulators in other parts of the world to really see if the window of opportunity for placebo-controlled trial is over, which seems to be the case, at least for certain population.
Okay, thank you. So we have another question, and it's about clinicians. And the question is that another hurdle for platform trials would be lack of literacy and training on platform trials of clinicians. So the person is asking if there exist materials or tools out there to improve training. This is one question. And how can training on the specificities of platform trials be better integrated into clinical training? Wow, that's a very broad question. Anybody wants to answer about the tools, possible tools, materials for clinicians to improve training on platform trials? No answer.
It's a difficult one.
Yeah.
Actually, I guess I hope tools are being produced and provided. Of course, after the COVID-19 platform trials, probably there will be also a momentum to produce tools that can address the needs of the clinicians. But I'm not aware of any existing tools, honestly.
I mean, you can always go to the literature, and you can, if there are reviews on scientific reviews on platform trials, I mean, this information is there, but specific tools to train clinicians on platform trials, I don't know. I'm not aware of that. Martin or Fergus, do you know anything available? No?
Just one word on this point, because, yeah, just one word. ECRIN is building in the context of both the IMI, EU Pearl, and also the joint work package. We are building a toolbox for the design and planning of platform trial that can be reused. So it's not dedicated to training, but maybe it could be transposed. And I think this is a very good question. Once we will have built this toolbox, maybe we could transpose it into training material. Thank you.
I think it's time. It's exactly the time. And I would like to thank you all for your participation and ECRIN for the organization. So thank you very much. And we'll be seeing each other, I hope, very soon.